Welcome, Graham. Thank you for joining us this year. I also want to give a shout out to our AMTNYS team who helped make this conference possible, especially our AMTNYS president, Jamar Pickren. Thank you, Jamar, for all the work you do for us.
No problem. Welcome, everyone.
All right, Graham, whenever you're ready, but don't feel rushed at all.
Yeah, not I won't feel rushed at all. It's 3:30. Definitely want to make sure I honor people's time and dive in and kind of get started. So thank you first of all to Gene and the team for inviting me. I'm kind of bummed out. I was looking forward to meeting up in person. I actually live. I live in Atlanta now, but I was born and raised in Toronto, so it was going to be an opportunity to pop over the border, go see mom and dad, the parents, but nope, not allowed to go back home right now. So I'm stuck in my basement, but I'm with my math friends right now. So super excited to have the opportunity to kind of connect when most of us might not be able to attend an in-person conference. So thank you to the New York State team for putting this together and making it free for teachers. That's such a wonderful opportunity. Thank you to the team. But before I even get started, I want to say thank you to you. As I'm sitting here, I've got two screens here, but I'm watching the chat window over here, and we've got what a beautiful range of teachers that we have from kind of all over the place. I saw all the way from 12th grade to support, all right on down through kindergarten and first grade. And I think whenever we can cross-pollinate through multiple different grade levels, it's such a beautiful space. Because let's be honest, if you teach a specific grade level, wouldn't it be nice if you only had that grade level's understanding in your classroom, right? Like when we think about it, if you teach sixth grade, you don't teach sixth grade. What you end up doing is you teach a group of 12-year-olds who function at like a second grade level through a 10th grade level. And your job as your math superpower as a teacher is to connect with every kid within that range. And it can be really hard. And then the carpet has been pulled from underneath us. And now we have to do this in this virtual space. And it's something that is really hard to do in person. And now many of us have had to pivot and try and take our best practice online. Let's be honest, none of us have this in our pre-service teaching, just something that none of us had. So my thing is, thank you for just taking time out of your day. We've got an hour. I'm going to try and finish up a couple minutes early, but if you don't have the chat window open right now, I'm going to ask that you take a quick second, open up that chat window. I know that many of you do that. That's going to be kind of the way that I'll get to see what you're thinking, save you unmuting, muting, unmuting, muting. I'll try and get through this in about 50 minutes per se, but I also want to leave some questions because I think it's important that we try and cross-pollinate as much as possible. So let's kind of dive in here. Yeah, and it's going to be kind of like drinking from a fire hose. It'll go fast, but then we'll go from there, and then we'll have a chat. But thank you for hanging out. So here's the big thing: when we teach virtually, one of the things that I got really overwhelmed with when we start talking about back in March, when the world got sideways, I was up in Westchester that right before everything went crazy. But then when I got home, we went to virtual, and I got really overwhelmed because immediately people that I look up to a lot in terms of colleagues and just people who really have their act as a teacher together, they've got the latest, greatest app, or they've got this new technology thing. They've got the new the new technology, and that is hard for me. Like, I'm working with students, I'm working with teachers, and so one of the things that I immediately want to start off by sharing is less is more. There's always going to be some new technology out there. There's always going to be a new app that we can push in front of students. But at the end of the day, I have to keep my sanity. I have to be able to wrap my head around what I'm actually doing and how I'm doing it, and how is it that I can best support the students that I'm trying to work with. Or if you're in a support role, how is it that we can share this message with our teachers? It can't be always about the technology. It has to be about the student learning. At the end of the day, that's what we all love. That's what we all care about. So what I want to do today is talk about ways that by using less technology, less apps in a remote learning setting, we can learn a heck of a lot more about our students. And so that's my goal for today. How is it that we can pull out this idea where less can actually be greater than more? And so in order to do that, it comes down to this struggle that I had to deal with, and maybe you're dealing with it. Like, first of all, there's this whole list of content that we need to teach. Like, I've got my standards, I've got my learning objectives. There's always going to be that stuff. I just need to cover the standards. I just need to teach the standards. But then when now we've had to pivot, it's how I teach. So what does this look like in a remote learning setting? So what I started to do was I started to think about this. It's like, well, what if I didn't worry about what I had to teach? And I started thinking about those things that I love most about in-person learning. Like, what are those things that I love most about in-person learning, which is the how I teach. There's a lot of things that I'm missing right now, being able to squat down next to a student at a chair. Like, that's hard to do in a virtual space. Being able to allow student voices and amplify them in a remote learning setting. Like, you know well as I do, you got those same stinking 3-4 kids, whether you're in person or in class, like they just blast out the answer and they've ruined it for the other like 75 children in your classroom, depending on what your class sizes are these days. But that's kind of the world that we're living in. So what I want to do today is not specifically focus on what we're teaching. It would be hard in a K-12 setting with this many with this range of teachers. I want to look at how we're teaching. And when I look at this, what I want to try and do is I don't want to go and try and struggle to meet the technology where the technology is. I would consider myself a good teacher. I hope that you would consider yourself a good teacher. So what I think our job is, and what I want to really try and push through today, is that we need to find technology that matches our teaching style. So I want to highlight the things today that you're probably already doing. You don't need to take really good tasks and put every single stinking task into an app and set up every single lesson. You don't have the time for that. You're momming, you're dadding, you're adulting, you're parenting, you're doing all these other things. You don't have the time. And then thinking about, what if you're teaching concurrently, where you're now teaching kids online, you're teaching kids in your classroom. That's ridiculous. It's a hard ask of anyone, but that's what we've been asked to do. So how is it that I can find my best in-person teaching practices and simply pivot and shift those into a remote learning setting? And that's all I want to do today, is provide you some ideas to where you can do less to get more out of your teaching styles. And so for me, it comes down to two fundamental approaches as math teachers. There's a first teacher and a second teacher. And these are the two teachers. There's two types of teachers. Every single one of us are one of these teachers. Are you a teacher who learns the math to then turn around and solve problems? Or are you the teacher who likes to solve problems, and then from the solving problems, do you want to learn the math? Like, the first teacher is like, let me show you how to do all this, and then I'm going to show you where it fits in the real world. Or do you want to say, here's the real world, and then we're going to extrapolate the math from that? I think by default, most of us probably are that first teacher. Most of us in this session right now, we're taught, hey, this is how you teach, this is how you do the math. Let me show you where it applies. But the more that I've learned and the more that I've done research, it's the second teacher that is the hardest teacher to be, but it's also the most effective teacher that builds that sustainable understanding that's going to have kids not know something on Friday and forget it by Monday. The students who learn problems, solve problems to learn math, are the students who know it on Friday and they still remember it on Monday. Like, how many times do we get frustrated when kids forget stuff over the weekend? So what are some ways that we can make this sustainable? And I'll be honest, it's hard work being the second teacher. And the second I don't focus on it, I default back to that first teacher. So it comes back to, what's important to you as a teacher? What's important? What are your goals as a teacher? Like, what are you trying to capture in person, and how can we take that online? So I want to share the thing that means the most to me, where I get the most bang for my buck when I start working with students, is this. I want to put myself in a situation to where I can capture student thinking in the moment. And I'll be honest, if many of you, like, we have so much, you've heard of these terms: formative assessment, diagnostic assessment, summative assessment. A lot of the times we'll save a really good task for the end of a unit. And if we do that, if you're that first teacher, the teacher who teaches the math and then solves the problems, it becomes summative assessment. But for me as a classroom teacher, summative assessment, it really sucks because it means that the autopsy of learning is the assessment. Like the learning is dead, the learning is over. Let me put it in a different way. You save a really good task for the end of a unit and it's summative. You grade it over the weekend. You realize that your kids haven't learned anything over the last 3 weeks. So you want to remediate with them on Monday, but you can't because your district pacing guide says that you should be starting on geometry. And Lord help you if you continue teaching a little bit longer. So what I want to do is show how we can take these really good tasks and use them at the beginning part of a unit as formative and diagnostic assessment. That's the big piece, because when we can catch student thinking in the process, it allows us to move their thinking forward. Because at the end of the day, it's not a matter of whether kids are going to learn at home, it's how they're going to learn at home. And it's our job to make that connection for them. So as we start talking about online and remote learning, and these terms are terms I would have never even really thought about maybe like a year ago, but it's about synchronous and asynchronous learners. And the synchronous learners are the kids who are there, whether you're teaching in person or those students who are online. Like you have that group of kids who show up online every single day. They're so punctual. Everything is great. They get the information. But then what do we do with that other group of kids? Say you're teaching in a more remote learning setting and they don't have access to the internet, or they do have access to the internet, but it's not broadband, so they can't stream things. How are we reaching all of our students and making this accessible for all of them? So I want to show ways that today that we can connect really rich tasks for both those students who are there synchronously, but then also how can we slow our roll just a little bit to connect with those students who might not be able to be there in the real time. So there's a couple things to consider, and I'll kind of model these today. So students can talk to each other. So how is it that you can get kids to talk to each other, whether they're synchronous and asynchronous? Students can't be here or they can see each other. A lot of times they might not have your cameras accessible. And then with those synchronous learners, communicate. Like we're communicating right now through this chat. Like there's a whole back channel, which we'd love to see in our classroom. So with those synchronous learners, this is where I typically went wrong with those students. Dan Meyer, if you're familiar with my work, I love 3-act tasks. I use 3-act tasks all the time. But what I realized is they're so powerful. So the second that I pivoted and we had to start teaching remotely, I would try and cram a whole task in one math period. And what I'd realize is that when I do this, I'd miss a lot of my students. I need to be patient. And when I'm patient, I can find out where my student thinking is in that progression of learning. One of the things that I've missed tremendously since we pivoted remotely is this ability to turn and talk. For me, turn and talk is one of the best ways that we can make mathematics accessible in our classroom. And just to kind of frame that thinking for you is in a 30-minute lesson, I would probably use, in person, I would probably use close to 20 to 25 turn and talks. Every question that I use every question that I ask in a math class, in an in-person setting, is turn and talk. It might be 15 seconds, but what that does is it tells the kids who want to blast out the answer, you know who they are, slow your roll. I don't want to hear from you yet. And it tells some of our marginalized students who normally don't have their voices amplified, we really value what you have to share. And think about a lot of our EL students. Many times they know the words they want to say, but they can't think of them quick enough in English to be included in the conversation. So turn and talk is really powerful, but what does that look like in a remote learning setting? Because you ask questions, and I shared it before, you're going to get the same kids that just blast out the answer, and you're scrambling for the mute every kid button on your on your keyboard. So here's one of the things that I use in a remote learning setting that really kind of, it helps me control the pace of learning. Here's less is more. It's not a fancy app. All it is a Google document. It's a Google slide. And in this Google slide, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, it's the same screen duplicated multiple times. If you have 32 kids in your class, you would duplicate that 32 times. Each student finds their own screen that hasn't been used, their own slide, they write their name. Now what happens is as I'm working through the flow of a lesson and I'm asking students, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What's your estimate? Students have their own individual slide opened up on their screen, and they're typing what it is they want to share, what they notice. And then I can do is scroll through that Google slide in real time. And in doing so, I can now pull out those students' voices who normally aren't amplified in class. It's a really simple way, and I'm going to show you how this can kind of look in your classroom. But this is one of the best ways that I've been able to capture student thinking, but then also amplify those voices which normally aren't heard in our classroom. Now, if you choose not to use Google Slide, you might ask students to throw things in the chat window. But one of the things with chat windows is it can just be like cold calling on a student in a classroom. What I found is when I use Google Slides, students think of that Google slide as their own safe space. Now, if you're thinking, if you teach first grade or second grade or even kindergarten, and you're like, yeah, but Graham, my kids can't type. Well, in Google Slides and on keyboards and on iPads, depending on the technology you're using, there's usually nowadays, there is a voice to text feature. So you can now even have your youngest students who can't spell worth a lick, but they can voice to text. And what's nice is that if kids can't talk the language, we should never get them to try and write the language. So by using that voice to text speech, we now have 5 and 6-year-olds who can share their thinking, and I can amplify their voices. So I know some of you might have seen that, but my kids can't type, but they can use that voice to text feature. So just be careful also about using chat windows as well, because it can be like cold calling, or it could be really scary for a student to put their answer in a public space. Even though the Google slide is public, that private slide, they see it as their own little classroom there. So here's how I would facilitate a 3-act task, a problem-based lesson in a first grade classroom. And one of the reasons I wanted to go with a first grade classroom is because if we can do something as simple as this in a first grade classroom, imagine what we can be doing in 4th and 5th grade or middle school or in high school. So I want to give us the bare minimum, the less is more feature, and then you can take it and run and make it so much better. So here's what we would do in a first grade class. But we also have to think about those students. So I have a group of students here, some are online, some are not. We have the group, and I say, here's a video in the chat window. What do you notice as you watch this video? Go ahead, throw something in the chat window. What did you notice there? And I just had a moment to look at the chat windows, like drinking from a fire hose there. Yes, thank you for all the back channel talk. So we see Ben sees a whole bunch of cups, lemonade, different colors. And so you can use the chat window, you can use that Google slide, but now every student in your class can notice something. There's not a single student in your class that cannot notice something. So now every student feels as if they have something to contribute to the conversation. It's not like, hey, we're doing math, here's a problem, and you give them naked numbers. So everything that you've noticed. So here's my question for you. When you notice a bunch of cups and you notice 2 big jugs come in, you notice pink lemonade, you notice yellow lemonade, you notice that the pink jug got picked up and poured out and only 1 glass got filled up. When you look at those 2 jugs and that big stack of cups, what would you like to know? What are you curious about? What do you want to know? What do you wonder? Throw something in the chat window for us. Heidi, yeah, like how many cups? Do we have enough for everybody in our class? Absolutely. Like, will we have, like, how many cups will 1 glass fill up? So that's kind of the question that I'm after. Again, we're using the chat window here. It would be really difficult to monitor a Google slide with 172 people in there. But just showing like now in real time, I'm seeing what you're thinking, but you're not having to jump in and blurt out your answers. I'm monitoring kind of as it goes. So the next piece here is you've already noticed, you've already wondered, and so here's my question for you. This is the question that I would kind of highlight, which gets at a lot of the questions that you're after. How many glasses do you think both jugs will fill up? How many do you think it will fill up? Yeah, Diana, you're right all over that. So I'm going to sit tight here for 30 seconds. Come up with an estimate. Like, what's your strategic choice of a number? How many cups do you think it will fill up? How many glasses do you think it will fill up? I love Eric. Eric is super safe there. Eric's saying like between 20 and 30, or someone saying like 16-ish. Yeah, that ish is a powerful word in a math class. So 7 and 4 tenths, 7 and 4 tenths. Yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. So what we've done right now is we've gone through this. We've talked about all of these different things, and now we could highlight a couple students and they're thinking like, why do you think that many? What's going on? Why is that the case? And so in doing so, just giving you an example here. This is from a first grade student, Mary Beth. And so I asked Mary Beth, so as we're going through there, she's using that voice to text feature. So she noticed is pink and yellow lemonade, jugs, cups, table. How many glasses will it fill up? She estimates 10 cups. And what's nice then is even when they're making their estimates, I can also formatively assess, like if Mary Beth says 2 cups, there might be an issue. Or if she says 750 cups, there might be an issue. So again, all of this students thinking in real time allows me to formatively assess what they know and where their thinking is. And what information do you need to know? Well, she says, I don't know what information I need to know. So I've got a pretty good idea now where student thinking is. And that is where I stopped the lesson. But that's also where I messed up. What I used to do is keep on plowing through this task. There's nothing that says we can't take a task and break it out over a day or two. In person, I'm going to do this task in a full day. But what I realized is that when I would cram through a task online, I'm missing a whole bunch of my students. And you're also going to have those students who are done the problem in like 1 second. And then you're going to have another group of students who need that time, that thought processing time to sit down and kind of grapple and work with the problem. And so here's how it works out. At the beginning of the class, whether you're synchronous or asynchronous, every student is at the same starting place. But now, if I just keep plowing through that lesson, here's what ends up happening to the students. I have a group of students who are online, and I've began to push their mathematical thinking forward. But I'm missing another whole group of students that might not be there online. And so this is where we get that separation of understanding. And to be honest, this is a huge equity issue, because the students who are there in real time, the students who have access to the class are getting the information they need, but we're missing those other groups of students. And then I kind of wonder, like, is this also any different than how we approach it in person? Like, there's a group of kids who get it, there's a group of kids who don't get it, but what are we doing to differentiate and to meet the needs of those students who might not be there? And so here's what I would end up doing. At the end of day one, after I ask students, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What's your estimate? What information do you need? They let me know, and then I would email this to students, or I would post it to our Google Classroom, or however you plan on sharing this. I now send this to students in their own private time. And if mom or dad does, or grandma doesn't have access to email, but they do have a cell phone, I'm going to text them a picture of this. There's other ways that we can reach those students who don't necessarily have access to the technology. So 1 jug fills up 7 glasses of lemonade. How many will 2 jugs fill up? You don't have to be a rocket scientist here to kind of figure that out, how many jugs it's going to be. But then, so now we have this, I'll post this to the Google Classroom or however we get it to them, but I could also send an email. And this would be an email that I would send out to to the guardian, whoever it is, or if you're in middle school, high school, and kids have access to email, or if they have a school email, I send them the information so that they can do it on their own time. That just has everything that we've talked about. And now what's happened is I've leveled the playing field for the students who were there online, but I've also allowed those students who were there not in real time to asynchronously catch up to the synchronous students. So that's where we're kind of leveling that playing field for students. And then on day 2, this is how we begin to start day 2. So, and it might not be the immediate after day, but what will happen then is after that day, student will send all the work, or they'll post it wherever, however you have students post their work. And then we open up the next day with the reveal. Now, what's nice about this is because students have already posted their work, I can now already begin to think about, before I get in front of students, the work that I want to highlight and share at the end of, so basically I'm opening up today's lesson with yesterday's closing. And by looking at the student work, I'll be honest, what I used to do was I would get 2 pieces of student work. I'd have kids come up to the document camera, they'd show their work, and basically they've integrated technology, and now I have a good observation, but it's just a show and tell. I was never intentional about the student work that I would want to share at the end of the lesson. I would only ever try to highlight right answers, or like the nicest drawing. But now I'm much more intentional about selecting student work that shows a progression of understanding to move student thinking forward. So here I'm at a place where I've just showed the reveal, but I've also gone ahead and already pulled out the student work that I want to highlight in the closing or the wrap up of the lesson. So here's what I want to do. I want to take we'll take 1 minute in the chat window. When students know that there's 2 jugs and each jug fills up 7 cups of lemonade, what are the strategies that you think a group of students would use to solve this? And it would be the same whether you're in middle school, high school, it doesn't really matter. It's about getting that student work and anticipating those understanding. So when students are adding 7 plus 7, how might they do that? I'll sit tight for 30 seconds here. Drop something in the chat window for us, please. Yeah, draw all, count all. I'm seeing some kids are going to use multiplication. Absolutely. And you know what's funny is that's the range of thinking that we have in our classrooms. Like not every kid is going to draw all, count all. Some kids are going to use doubles. Some kids will use make a 10, take 3 from one 7, give it to another 7. Some kids might say, I know 6 plus 6 is 12 and I need to add 2 more on the end. But here's the thing, I've given students an opportunity to work through that task without me infiltrating their thinking and telling them how to solve the problem. So it's also a blessing for me, because a lot of the times I would give students the information, oh, it's 2 jugs and each jug fills 7. And then I get in the way and I never really get to understand how they're thinking because I've infiltrated them. So by this, I give them the information and I step away and I just get out of the way. And when I'm not standing in students' way, they'll usually fall back to their default safest strategy. The kids that are comfortable, they're going to jump in and do repeated addition or multiplication. When we're not around them, kids they'll never really try risky solutions. They'll always go what they're safest with, which lets you know what they're really comfortable with. So something to kind of think about. So lots of great strategies being shared there. So the Math Learning Center, if someone out there can drop that link inside the chat window for us, it is a fantastic place to where you can find tools. If you're in middle school, Desmos is a great place for online graphing where kids can. So here's what happened is the students are familiar with Math Learning Center. They jump online, they model the problem. We had a full lesson on how to do screenshots with their Chromebooks. So now students take the screenshot of their thinking and they send it to me or they post it to me. So this is one piece of student thinking. Here is another piece of student thinking right here. What's happening here? I'm going to sit tight. What do you see here? Throw something in the chat window for us. So here's what I've done with this student. Now, some students might not have access to that math learning app. So here I will just set up a quick little conference with this student, and they have the information, and I'll say, hey, can we meet for 5 seconds, and can you share your thinking with me? And then I'll ask them to hold their picture up to the screen. I'll take a screenshot, and then I can fold that into wrapping up tomorrow's lesson. It doesn't, some of the best ways are the most low-tech ways. It doesn't have to be some super fancy app or some super fancy technology, just a really simple way to capture student thinking. Here is another one with the Math Learning Center. This is, you can see here, this is the make a 10 strategy. And then this one, I texted, you text the parents the information, they take a picture of it, and then they send it back to me however the student solved it. So here it's draw all, count all. So there's multiple different ways that we can capture student thinking just like we would in person. So here's what I do now is I have all these pieces of student thinking, and these are the ones that I want to highlight. So what I want to do is I'm going to sit tight now for a minute. In the chat window, if you can, what's the same, what's different about certain ones of these? And this is something that I do with the students, is I'll put up 4 pieces of student work, and then I'll ask them, what's the same, what's different? I'll mute them all, and then we'll come back and we'll share. But I'm just going to ask you in the chat window, what do you notice? And I see lots of us are looking at the visuals. And what would happen if you look at the strategies? What are same with the strategies? What are same? Because every student has used a drawing, but the understanding that they're modeling with their drawing is so much different from student to student. Making tens, doubles, lots of different understanding. And so even if you're in 6th or 7th grade, middle school, high school, what you can do is when you capture the student thinking, you can now talk about what's the same, what's different, and you can make those connections between the thinking, where what I would do is I would just share those 2 pieces of student work, and there would never be a connection between them. And so here's the connection that I wanted to get after with this group of 1st grade students. I want to try and get this student who's using a draw all, count all, a counting by 1. So they had the 7 and then they count on. I want to get them thinking more about one-to-one correspondence. I want to get them thinking about more part whole thinking, where making a 10 or taking out the 5s or something along those ways right there. And then from there, that's where we can now set up our groups for the next day as we start approaching that in-person learning. So for me, the big thing is teaching at the speed of learning, where synchronous learners and asynchronous learners can all have access to the mathematics. And I think what's happening right now is we're kind of grasping at straws, and we're some kids are getting it, some kids aren't getting it, but there's that divide, that gap between the students who get it and don't is really just getting bigger and bigger and bigger in our classrooms. So at the end of the day, making math accessible. So big piece here is that we have kids who are online and kids who are not online. How is it that we can bring students together online and kind of work simultaneously? And in doing so, what that can do is allow all kids to make meaningful sense of the mathematics that we're after. So if you're looking for tasks, there's lots of different places to where we can get these tasks. One of the places I'll kind of is you can find them here on my website. is gfletchy.com is where you can find some. Robert Kaplinski is another wonderful place to where you can find these websites. If you're in middle school or high school, here is a link I just dropped in the chat window. It's called Emergent Math. Jeff Kroll has this wonderful website, and on this website, what he's already done is he's curated all of the tasks from out there that are out there. The majority of them are free resources, and he has all rich tasks just like this, all problem-based lessons that are broken down into individual strands and domains. And with that, you can do the same thing that we're doing here with this first grade task, but you can apply it to grades that are farther along as well. So looking at the time, that went definitely a lot quicker than what I was anticipating here. So so my question is, that went way quicker. So my question is, yeah, we'll kind of open it up for some questions, or if you have some questions, if you can drop some questions in the chat window. The biggest thing that I wanted you to walk away with today is I saw like Pear Deck is awesome. There's a lot of different apps that are out there, but as you're working with teachers or you're supporting teachers, trying to keep things as simple as possible is the best way to make connections for students. So kind of go here through some of the questions. The breakdown of day one. So on day one, Carly, on day one, talking about the what do you notice, what do you wonder, trying to get students to make those estimates. And as they make those estimates, that's kind of where we shut down and asking students, what information do you need to solve the problem? And then in doing so, we park the bus there, allow all students to kind of work on the problem off class time. And then we open up the lesson the next day by closing up. So that's when I take all the student work and I kind of order it. So you're really doing, if you're familiar, Carly, with the structure of a 3-act task, Act 1 and Act 2 are done on day 1, but the solving part is done after class. And then after class, and then we come back the next day. And that's when I want to highlight and be very intentional about the student thinking that we're sharing. I see Heather's asking a question. Do you share student work with other students on day 2 or 3? And I don't think that you have to do like a day 1, day 2, day 3. I think you could do it on day 2 or day 3. There might be some students that might not have access to it after day 1. So even if you leave a little bit of a lag time there, that can definitely help out students. So pick and choose however you want to do that. You kind of know when your students are able to get to things, but trying to kind of slow it down so that you give all students access to the problems that you're working with, to where you're not just helping and supporting those students who are there as your synchronous learners.